In this video, I wanted to talk a little about testing the results that you and your client think were achieved during a session, throughout and at the end of a hypnotherapy session. And this came about after a colleague of mine has been hearing me speaking about this in various occasions, and they wondered if testing the client's results or resources could be actually breaking those results. I found this a very important question to touch upon, indeed, because it elicited two very interesting touch points in my mind. And first, it immediately reminded me that in more of a traditional ways of doing hypnosis or hypnotherapy, but even in some more of contemporary ones, the testing in the literal sense of the word is barely done throughout or even in the end of the session, if at all. So I thought it's worth sharing a bit more about it and what is it about. Now, the therapist rightfully so want the results of the session to last, as we all do, right? And I see how dreading the idea of this possibility, the results breaking after they were achieved in front of you, can be, at least and exceptionally when the practitioner, for example, has no other way but after inducing a trance state to read the pre-session prepared suggestions to their clients. And secondly, this also made me understand something else very profound, which is I see how without testing the client's results or resources, the practitioners and as well as their clients are convinced that it should take dozens of sessions to achieve a desired outcome with hypnosis or hypnotherapy. Now, more sessions can, of course, also happen when including the testing, but it's very rare altogether. And even if it happens, it's not dozens of sessions, sorry. And however, it is still naturally creating a reference point for the transformation that takes place during the session to have a place to sit after the session whenever it takes place. If no other reference points ever were present for that particular matter in the person's life before they came to see you. So the results are going to happen at the right time, let's say, and if not fast in that sense, but in fewer sessions and lasting anyway. So not to drag this a lot, I'll tell you the short answer first. And in order for it to make a bit more sense or to be more understandable, I will explain it in a couple of more sentences from the point of view of organic conversations in hypnotherapy. So the short answer is, if you don't test those results, the world outside will. You see? So you can imagine now, does it happen that the testing can break the results? Not all the time, but the answer is still yes, it can. And if it does, it means only that your client still hasn't come to a place that they would that they wanted to or needed to for what they came in to see you. Yet they are still at your place, and whatever it is that it is left, would be resolved right there and then. Because if you zoom out a little to see the whole session, the problem is already malleable by that point. And it's much easier to work things through and out by that time and during the client is still with you. So it's not going to take hours or days, but barely minutes. You see, it's almost like, let's say, exposure therapy, but without at all needing to literally expose the client to the outside triggers. So the sessions are much faster also because in organic conversations in hypnotherapy, there are no time spent in using techniques to induce trance, nor language patterns for that matter. So the client goes in and out of a deeply focused state naturally. And by the time we test the resources or the result altogether, the client had already done the integration themselves of those resources found during the session. It's also because you didn't either send them anywhere throughout through a regression technique to find the root cause of their symptoms. But due to you asking relevant questions to break down whatever they thought their issue was, they were able to go all by themselves to all necessary places relevant to them and be able to connect the dots also by themselves. So the principle here is all people are uniquely different and not all will respond to a technique the same way, you see. And without you having to think of a certain technique or a question, on the other hand, you also truly listened. So in other words, you had an undivided attention to everything that was happening in front of you because you didn't split your focus or attention between your client and thinking what's the best induction to trance technique, timeline, connecting the dots, reframe, or integration and suggestions. Now, doing all that with techniques and in a complete trance state during the whole session, on the other hand, and that if done correctly, meaning to know the exact timing, when to start, continue, or stop something. And if on top of that, it happens that your client also can't seem to grasp the technique as a concept because they are not trained as therapists, you would then had to start thinking how to reframe the question so it fits the technique for the client to understand what to do and how to do it. And then lead, of course, altogether constantly speaking because the client is too, let's say, spaced out by that time to be also able to think through anything on their own. So now, you too can probably see how there may be a need for multiple sessions after that kind of a lengthy session where you, as a therapist and the client, probably are exhausted. And in that case, you wouldn't want to hear, of course, about testing the results or breaking them, the possibility of them breaking altogether. No one would. I see. So, okay, without drifting too far from the point of this video, I'll share with you what kind of testing can be done depending where your client is. So if you are not trained in this type of conversational hypnosis, just to have an idea if you are still excited for speeding up the results of your sessions. So those are logical testing, you see, emotional, environmental or situational, and even illogical one, just so you wrap up the whole session in a fun and good way or good spirits, let's say, after which you clearly do a demarcation, meaning separate from the topic of the session and come to a more of a normal awake state. I have spoken about this in some of my other videos, and tell the client about the processing which is normal to happen after a session, whichever way it happens, and that it will stop at one point. Well, this was all about testing for this video. Let me know if that made sense to you, and if it does and fits the modality you work with, I invite you to curiously apply it and see how the results may differ in your future sessions. For now, thanks for listening and take care.